Hello and welcome to a very special podcast series. Forbes India presents the Green Billions Code podcast. This podcast is about sustainability and environment. Sustainability and the exhortation across the world will have to take on a new incarnation and will have to be embedded in the soul of every organization, business or otherwise. Businesses cannot flourish in an environment where lives are in danger and livelihoods are being endangered. The industry remains squarely accountable too. Growth models will have to be reoriented and reframed, keeping in mind the responses to climate change goals and sustainability achievements and ambitions. How is sustainability and conversations around environment, social and governance, or commonly known as ESG, impacting the world economy, the world of business, and the Indian economy in particular? How are industries and businesses ushering in sustainability initiatives? Is green hydrogen a viable, scalable, efficient alternative fuel for fossil fuels? And what about individual responsibilities? What about individual choices? What about people's own responsibilities towards climate change goals? The Green Billions Code podcast is a special 6-episode podcast series where we are going to discuss all of these and much more with global and national experts who are in the front line of ushering changes. For the inaugural episode, we have Mr. Tony Abbott, former Australian Prime Minister, and Dr. Prateek Kanakia, founder and chairman, TheGreenBillions Limited, dive deep into the broader issues of climate change, resilience models, growth models, and green hydrogen, and how to turn municipal solid waste into a scalable, efficient, viable alternative by turning these into green hydrogen. For this episode, I am delighted to have an extremely multi-talented personality, an engineer, an innovator, an education reformist, a passionate conservationist, and a climate change practitioner, Ramon Magsasay Award winner Sonam Wangchuk, who is also known as Phungshuk Wangdu, the popular character that he inspired in the Bollywood blockbuster 3 Idiots. We also have Dr. Prateek Kanakia, founder and chairman, TheGreenBillions Limited, one of India's leading climate change tech evangelists, and also someone who is spearheading the country's green hydrogen initiative, particularly with the changes that he's bringing about in turning municipal solid waste into green hydrogen as a scalable, efficient, viable alternative. A very warm welcome, Mr. Sonam Wangchuk and Dr. Prateek Kanakia, to the Green Billions Code podcast. Delighted to have you here.
Good morning, Gaurav.
Thank you. Mr. Wangchuk, first to you. Now, there cannot be a more appropriate time to talk about climate change than now. Persistent rains and coming out in torrents have submerged big metropolises like Delhi and Mumbai and brought it to the news. We have seen what rains can do and the havoc that it can create in the mountains and hills of Himachal Pradesh, and also hundreds of acres of land remain submerged by overflowing rivers across Assam, Bihar, Gujarat, and Uttarakhand. It's easy to be dazed by the devastation. It's easy to be dazed by the impact of climate change that has reached our homes. Businesses, government, policymakers, individuals, all of us have to get together. The time to act is now. What, according to you, is a good starting point?
I've seen people debating about where to start. Should it be governments and corporates who make policies and big impact, or citizens, individuals? But then many say individuals turning their lights off doesn't change big things. I would say, nonetheless, we should start with citizens, engaging them in change, not because their change will make all the difference. It's true that governments make much bigger difference, corporates make much bigger difference, but it is individuals, citizens, who change what governments do, who change what corporates do. Don't forget that citizens are not just about planting trees and switching lights off, which is very good and must be promoted, and that's the most relatable thing. But much more than that, when citizens are engaged in these things, they can vote change in the government and in corporates. It's citizens who have the power to change things, ballot to change governments and their policies, and their wallet to change corporates and what they do. So citizens, I would say, by far is where we should start. And when you do it effectively with individuals, governments will change their policies to the moods of the people who vote them. And corporates will change their practices to please the customer who's the king.
Dr. Prateek Kanakia, I'll come to the individual social responsibility, and I'm very fascinated by the term that you very commonly use, personal social responsibility, as compared to corporate social responsibility. I'll come to that a bit later. But first of all, I would try to understand one paradox, and it's about the green hydrogen mission. The government's green hydrogen mission is very well appreciated, and by all measures is also very well intentioned. But there is something that is a little perplexing to understand. If you take a long-term view, the unrelenting focus on using water to create or produce green hydrogen, possibly in a couple of decades from now, could lead to a situation where we'll create an imbalance of water, because water, after all, is a finite resource. And is it something that you would rather change? Because this focus, in a zeal to create a greener fuel, which is green hydrogen, using water, we could end up actually creating an imbalance in the ecosystem, which would be difficult to reverse, isn't it?
So it seems you've decided to catch the bull by the horn to start with. Yes, you're absolutely right that it is very ironic that we keep speaking about water conservation at one hand, and the other side is speaking from the rooftop that we need to start using water to produce a new form of fuel to get us sustainability or to sustain us. This is definitely not an extremely right approach. We need to look at various alternate routes to produce newer form of fuels. The so-called biofuels also, use biomass, organic mass, which is according to me again as a natural agent to replenish the fertility of soil. Now, Government of India has come up with something called Integrated Wasteland Development Program, while they have mapped the whole country. So the day is not that far. We already are in seas of the matter. The government has mapped the whole country and has come up with the data wherein all the states wherein the land is degraded due to reasons like overt. So let's say in north we have the issue of snow. The vegetation doesn't happen much due to snow, or for that matter, global warming issues are creating reduction in forest covers, or there are salt pans which are increasing, and the land is becoming infertile. So one needs to understand that water is required for everything. So even if we talk about the shirt I'm wearing, or a trouser he's wearing, or the shoe which is being molded, everything requires water. And this narrative is suiting the oligarchs of the world, wherein they want to make their lives easier, and hence are pushing this route of green hydrogen being achieved through water, and thereby they think as if availability of raw material is very much necessary for any scale they want to reach. My view was very clear while we started chasing this space of hydrogen, that let's try and create an impact. While the whole world is moving in a certain direction, let us try and at least create an impact story. While if we can convert municipal solid waste into hydrogen, if there is a way to actually make this happen, this will solve a lot of issues of the world, and there can't be a bigger impact story than this.
Absolutely. Mr. Wangchuk, the Himalayan glaciers is a source of life for about 2 billion people. And they are the spring of life also for the Indian continent. It's about time we turn the focus on preserving them, because otherwise we are probably staring at a situation where it'll be extremely difficult to turn it around, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, the Hindu Kush Himalayas are often considered the third pole after the north and the south, the biggest reservoir of fresh water in frozen form. It will be suicidal for 2 billion people to trade this with the consumption and production of goods of today, and then you uproot your own future. We can live without a few consumer materials, but we cannot live without water. So it's like the classic chopping off the branch which you are sitting on. So we must do everything to conserve these glaciers. Two ways I see. One is, of course, global. It's melting because the global temperatures are rising, and in the Himalayas the rise is even sharper, and it hurts where it affects where it hurts most when these glaciers melt because of this extra ordinary rise in temperature. So globally, definitely people in big cities have a huge responsibility to make sure these reservoirs of water are conserved for such large number of people. The second part, which is emerging in recent researches, is that it's not only the global climate change, which is because of emissions, it's also local pollution, local human activities. It can be from unburnt fuel from kitchens in the foothills of Himalayas to transport on the highways to Ladakh and places, to military, which by nature has to pollute and emit a lot with all their machinery and so on. So locally, this black carbon that comes out of these machines and fires is sitting on the glaciers, making them dark and therefore melt in the sun. So both ends, the local Himalayan ecosystem has to be really looked into, and that's why in Ladakh we are saying fragile regions like Ladakh must be safeguarded from rampant unbridled industrialization, and that's why we need all provisions in the constitution, like the Schedule 6 that Ladakh is demanding, to the global climate results from big cities. Both ends must be taken care of if we are to keep these springs of the large populations in this highly densely populated part of the world between India and China, with Himalayas in between. We'll have to take action on all fronts.
Absolutely. Dr. Kanakia, Mr. Wangchuk just mentioned why, and he underlined this point, that why it is absolutely important to strike an equilibrium between local activity and global climate change goals. But I want to, nail it down to a specific point here, particularly with respect to India. The devastation and the fury that floods and rain can cause, and we have seen it in our own eyes in Himachal, the visuals are still fresh, and as we speak, the devastation continues. The consequences have been debilitating. But India also has a lot of population to feed. Unless we take care of it now, how are we going to feed our population? Because you have a food supply target to meet, because we have, as of now, close to 1.45 billion people to feed, and that is growing. And if mountains start disappearing like this, the ones that we have just noticed in Himachal and a few years ago in Uttarakhand, where does this lead to, and how do we get an action plan for this that is implementable quickly?
See, first of all, let us get it straight and right that there is no shortcut to this, but the only way to reach or attain sustainability to have sustained efforts. So you're right in saying that due to these climate change issues, and we've been seeing and witnessing these floods and deluges with our naked eyes, and every day something newer is happening. There are no standard seasonal cycles anymore. While we were growing up, we were mugging up these answers on greenhouse gas effect, or for that matter global warming. At least I could never imagine that by the time I'll grow up and not even reach 40, I would just see these things happening. It is very unfortunate that our national capital, I claim that an infant born in New Delhi has an average age less than average age, let's say 10 years less than other states, because you won't you can't breathe for 4 months in a year.
That's right.
How would an infant's lung cope up with these climate change issues? What is his should I say, where has he gone wrong in being born in Delhi? So these climate change issues need to be catered and carried, the efforts needs to carry out so that these ecological balances don't go wrong. But we've been influenced by the Westerners in recent past, and all due to lack of interest in agriculture as a profession. The bottom of the pyramid of our country, most of the agriculturist families, they do not want to carry on this profession of agriculture and farming. So we need to basically look at new age. We can adopt new age solutions, but we should not remain dependent on these external external aid, external products like fertilizers and pesticides. I am very well opposed to and adverse to these ideas, and idea is to get back to the natural ways of farming, and it is very alarming, and we need to contain it as soon as possible. As on yesterday, we need to work on replenishing those wasteland which the government has anyways thrown on our faces. So idea is to get back to the natural ways of farming and water conservation and soil conservation. These are the real issues we need to look at.
Absolutely. You have invented and pioneered the concept of and the technique of ice stupas, which is essentially creating artificial glaciers which use wasted spring water during winter, store it, and then start melting during late spring and early summers, which is when farmers need the water the most. How has been the progress and its adaptability?
These are small fixes that we are pushed to. These are not something glorious that we can take pride in. Up in the mountains where it is really sensitive and delicate, we suffer the most for no fault of ours from the actions of the people in big cities living their luxurious lives. So our glaciers are melting away very fast, which is the lifeline of people in deserts, high altitude deserts like Ladakh. So we are pushed to survive, how to ensure our survival. So one of these methods is to refreeze the melting glaciers in winter so that it lasts till summer when the farmers need water the most. Yes, it has progressed. It's now spread in many villages, in dozens in Ladakh and neighboring Pakistani villages, Nepal villages, even in Europe and Latin America, people are taking it, and our people help them. It's a kind of reverse technology transfer. Regions like Mongolia have been very interested in doing it there. But all said and done, it's again very small fixes that local people have been pushed to. I don't want to, think of it as a great achievement or anything. At the most, it is like an SOS call. It's a symbol of what's happening in the high Himalayas and, of course, the seashores to the people in big cities to change their lifestyles. I'm more about using this as a SOS message for people in big cities to please live simply in your big cities, so we in the mountains can simply live.
Mr. Wangchuk, you have also designed the Secmol campus, which runs entirely on solar energy, from cooking to heating to lighting. First, tell us more about it, and two, how do we make it more adaptable outside of that?
This is a very old story. In the mid-90s, when we were making an alternative school in the middle of nowhere, in a desert, we looked into various possibilities of getting electricity there. When we asked the electricity suppliers, it would cost like lakhs and lakhs of rupees just to bring the lines there. And it was anyway government fund for village development. And the engineer who used to be very friendly to us, they said, we'll make an exception and bring you these poles and give you electricity. But I said, it costs so much and you will be robbing a village of their electricity. Rather we go solar. And it turned out that going solar in mid-90s, when it was very expensive, still was cheaper than the electric lines that they would lay to bring electricity to our campus. So we decided, let that money go to the people in the villages, we'll go solar. So we went solar for electricity, which is only a small part of what you need in a cold place like Ladakh. It's only 10%. 90% is heat that people need, in a cold place. And heat doesn't need to come from electricity. We can capture heat directly from the sun through the architecture of the building. And putting a little bit of high school physics, we made buildings that would capture the heat directly in the walls that face the sun and would then act like a battery for the heat. Heat batteries are very simple. It can be building materials, it can be water. You don't need acid or lithium to store heat and release. So we undid all of that complication and just kept photovoltaics for the 10% of our energy needs, which had to be electricity for computers, television, and so on. Rest of the 90% was captured from the sun directly using walls as batteries, and we achieved magical effects. Inside the rooms, it would be plus 18 when it is minus 18 outside. And that's how things should be. We shouldn't go at the easiest available, no-brainer ways of doing it, getting it from the grid, which was very deficient in Ladakh. Half the time it was, blackouts, shutdowns. So by going solar, we rid ourselves of all that. We had no cut downs in electricity ever, no blackouts. In other places, even if you don't have blackouts in like Mumbai, Pune, etc., most of our electricity, more than half, is coal-based, coal-powered,
fossil fuel,
which is very brown and bleak. So it's best if you make your energy yourself on your rooftops, in your, premises, and that's what we try to do, but not always depend only on, conventional sources like energy from the lines. You can also warm your buildings in cold places directly, cool your buildings in hot places directly, rather than only think of air conditioners. You could think of how to design your building so that the gap is so small that you could fill with a very tiny air conditioner if at all needed. So we don't look at degrees. I see in hot places that you just throw money at the problem. It's hot, so you won't invest in insulating the building or orienting the building or painting the building white. Rather, increase the size of the air conditioner and keep paying money forever. So this, with a little application of thought, can be done anywhere.
Absolutely. Prime Minister set a target for net zero for India 2070, which essentially means that the government is willing to walk the talk. But while it demonstrates the government's intent to walk the talk on climate change goals and be on the right side of the climate change debate, a one-size-fits-all kind of an approach, do you think will work for a geography like India?
This is again more of a coincidence that while before this podcast started, me and Wangchuk Sahab was discussing on his approach and whatever he's doing in Ladakh. I was very curious to know if these kind of solutions can be adopted in the mainstream cities like Mumbai, Delhi, and so on and so forth. He gave me a very strong perspective that, it is not about these solutions, but every region requires a tailor-made solution, and people needs to come forward and have an aligned thought process to make or adopt these targets or to achieve these targets. So if we need to go carbon neutral by 2070, there cannot be a straight line. It has to be a tailor-made approach, and coincidentally we have a structure where there is a structure of cooperative federalism, and states are entities in themselves. So they all need to wake up to this idea of achieving this goal by 2070 and going carbon neutral and bringing the change at the bottommost level and the institutional levels. So there cannot be a one-size-fits-all strategy or approach towards this issue, and it needs to have a tailor-made approach towards every region, and regional institutions, local bodies, urban local bodies, states, and eventually the central government, all will have to come together, inclusive of the citizens, as I must say. So we can achieve this very well, but definitely one size fits all won't work.
Absolutely. Mr. Wangchuk, have you been disappointed with the kind of efforts that the political class and governments have been taking on climate change?
Governments do what people desire. Governments actually, in a democracy, leaders follow. Leaders don't lead. It's the people, citizens, who lead with their aspirations and desires. And governments compete, or political parties compete to fulfill those desires of the people. So yes, it's not enough from the governments, but that's not because governments are not doing enough. In fact, I'm actually impressed with the Prime Minister, who's taking many environmental issues nationally and globally, even though his voters do not even care. That's very unusual, and I admire that. But otherwise, things will move only if people are sensitive enough and people move. I mean, he may take some initiatives. The next government may not care because voters don't care. People don't care. So I'm more disappointed with people, citizens of the world. They know and still don't care. So, and I'm disappointed with people who influence the people, which is media and influencers. They are not doing enough to sensitize people to care about things that matter. And if they did their job well, the true leaders who influence people and the media that takes these messages to people, and if people act, then governments will have no way but to act. Governments just do what people, the voters, the kingmakers want. So I'm less disappointed with governments, but more disappointed with the government makers, the voters.
That's right. Dr. Kanakia, the final question to you. Do you think it's about time to take a real look and also reframe growth models, keeping in mind that these businesses will have to be responsive to climate change and sustainability goals, not just on paper, but in practice over a sustained period of time?
So, Gaurav, as I had started, the concept of sustainability itself is self-explanatory. Anything which can be sustained uh, has to do with, so we can equate it any viable solution. Viability comes while it is sustainable. So anything which can be sustained is viable, and all these economic policies will have to be framed keeping in mind that the underwritten code for the world would be sustainability, as in the times to come. In fact, it has already started in certain parts of the world, that standard of procedures of every business is now linked with the ESG practices and compliances, environmental social governance of a company or an institution or an organization. How friendly the process is, how much carbon emission is happening during the process of manufacturing of or deliverance of any product or service. So that this is already started, and no I don't have any doubts that very soon these norms will start getting stringent for every industry, whether a polluter or non-polluter. But yes, the framework of these economic policies will have to be framed in tandem with these practices, and everyone has to wake up.
Mr. Sonam Wangchuk and Dr. Prateek Kanakia, thank you so much for sharing your deep insights on appropriate policies that the government should take, the politicians' role, the role of industries and individuals on the prospects of green hydrogen as an alternative fuel, and the possibilities of turning urban waste into greener energy. Thank you so much for taking the time out and dropping by to have this conversation. Thank you so much to our viewers and listeners who are tuning in from all parts of the world on various platforms and also on various web and social channels of ForbesIndia.com. Forbes India presents the Green Billions Code. Stay tuned.